Hello all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Conclave, and we are joined by a very special guest. He's been on the pod in the past. Eric is back, y'all. Eric, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me back. I am Eric Ekwueme from E Squared Film Reviews on Instagram, and I'm excited to join Jen and Sarah to talk about a movie that needs to be discussed. This is the reason why I love doing or having this hobby, is that when you see something and you just need to talk about it with other people. So again, thanks so much for having me back.
Of course. We had such a great conversation last time, and I think this one's going to be very different, but I think very interesting. So we're going to dive right in. Okay, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Conclave.
When Cardinal Lawrence is tasked with leading one of the world's most secretive and ancient events, selecting a new pope, he finds himself at the center of a conspiracy that could shake the very foundation of the Catholic Church.
All right. Ain't that a premise, y'all? Wow. Okay, well, we are going to start off in Movies and Us fashion with our one-sentence summaries. Eric, as our guest, would you like to share your one-sentence summary for Conclave?
Yes, my one sentence summary is: if Agatha Christie wrote two popes.
Nice. Yes, yeah. I've seen a lot of folks put these movies in conversation together, which I think is so fascinating. So yeah,
yes,
I'm sure we'll talk about some of that too. And I'm curious your thoughts too, because I think that seemed to cross your mind as well. Okay, Sarah, what is your one sentence summary?
Mine is, sometimes you get what you pray for.
Nice. Yeah, you do. And you might feel some type of way about it. My one sentence summary is, Your Eminence, the imminence of papal drama in your court is palpable.
Okay.
Little wordplay there. It's like a theater vocal warm-up there.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive right in and share our high-level thoughts about Conclave. We will not spoil this movie in this first section, and we were chatting before we hit record, but this is a movie you really should go in with a blank slate on, so don't listen to our spoiler territory comments. We won't spoil it quite yet, though. So, Eric, I'm curious your thoughts about Conclave. What's your high-level review? How did this land with you?
First, I'm just going to start off with an admission, and that is the first time that I saw this movie, I fell asleep through a lot of parts in it, and
we've all done it. We've been there.
I thought I had a grasp on this movie, even with me falling asleep, until I realized I got to the end. And again, no spoilers, but there's certain situations that happen, and I realized I slept through an entire important character. So I went back to watch this movie a second time, and what I will say in my high-level thoughts is I give myself a little grace for the first time falling asleep, because this is a dialogue-heavy, slow burn of a movie. But the second time around, I found it way funnier than I thought this would be. I thought this was going to be self-important, self-serious. It's got a lot of actors in it that gives this air of importance. But when you watch and listen to what these individuals are saying as they're trying to select this new pope, or as they try to vie for power, you quickly realize that this is silly. This is absolutely absurd. And I am just excited to dive into each of these characters, because they came to life in amazing ways, not necessarily ways that I think could be true to life, but in fun and surprising ways. So for me, this movie still, it's hard for me to fully recommend, because you just have to be ready to sit with 2 hours of dialogue. But if you do, you're going to be rewarded with a fun experience.
I'm so excited to talk about the humor in this movie when we get into some of the spoiler territory, because yeah, you're so right. This movie is so funny, and it kind of unveils the humor more and more as the movie goes, which I think is really funny. It's just in case you didn't get it at the beginning, you're going to get it by the end for sure.
Yes.
Okay, Sarah, what are your thoughts about Conclave? How did this land with you?
Yeah, I am one of those people that's like, yeah, dialogue heavy movie, let's go. I'm ready. Like, give me some good dialogue and I am interested. So I enjoyed myself with this. I was really impressed with obviously the dialogue and the way that it's written and the way that these conversations flow back and forth. Obviously the performances are very good, boasts such like a great talented cast in this. And I was just really impressed at how immersive this film felt for me, and a lot of the different technical components and like the sound mixing and the cinematography and all of these things kind of combined together to make me feel like I was there with them in the conclave and I was trapped in this really gorgeous space with them. So I was just really impressed at how all of these things came together to keep me engaged and interested when it really is just essentially 2 hours of dialogue. And I was on the edge of my seat for most of it. So yeah, this is one that I did enjoy.
Nice. All right. Well, I'm going to round us out and say I loved this as well. I had such a great time. I think it could have been probably like hit or miss. And I think the fact that, Eric, to your point, this movie doesn't take itself seriously is what makes this movie so great. I think that the version of this that's like really self-serious and like kind of a moody drama and really leaning into all of that would have felt a lot more like heavy and weighty. But the movie is able to have fun, and I think that adds such a different pop of color amidst a lot of the big things that they're discussing and these ideas about how this should be run and ideologies that are very big and weighty, but it's never too heavy. And I think it's been fascinating for me to think about at a larger perspective, just the box office success that I've been seeing and reading about with this movie. And I'm so pleased by it because I think it's such a signal to the movie studios that when they do it well, like we will eat it up, you know? And I think seeing everyone turn out for this movie and celebrate it and seeing all of the financial success of the movie is really exciting. Because this type of movie on paper, like, should not work at the box office at all. And when it's quality, when it's entertaining, and when there's enough meat for us to sink our teeth into, heck yeah, we're going to turn out for it, you know?
It's fascinating because this is a movie that is so clearly made for adults. Like you're not sitting a teenager in this movie and expecting them to have a good time. And usually that's box office death for movies now, is having movies strictly for the adult audience. But both audiences I saw this with, I mean, I would say the average age was well over 40, maybe in the 50s. Because this is a movie that speaks to them. It speaks to being able to sit through 2 hours of dialogue and picking up on some of those comedic bits. So I think this is that message to the studios: invest in movies for adults.
Yes, please. Yes, please. And the other aspect that's fascinating about this is like, it's a pretty cerebral movie, you know? And I think there's movies for adults that can be a little bit more showy and dramatic in all of those ways. But this, like you mentioned, being so dialogue heavy and really this like colliding of ideologies in a really fun backdrop is really what this movie is. And that is also really encouraging. It's an adult movie and an incredibly like heady movie, and we are down for it, clearly. So I think that's really, really exciting and neat to see. So it's thrilling. We'll see what happens the other aspect of this is the awards energy around this, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but that's also exciting to see too. So it's getting all of its flowers, and that's neat. All right, well, let's include a spoiler alert for Conclave. We're 3 for 3 for really being a fan of this movie. So go check this out and go into the movie blind if you can, and then come back and listen to the rest of this conversation because we're about to dive right in. And there's lots of twists and turns in this plot. Where should we start first? I guess maybe we can start with, were there specific twists or moments? There's a lot of big explosive moments in this movie, obviously. Was there any that really like you found yourself really thinking about and mulling on either during the movie or after the movie ended that kind of sticks out to you?
Not in sequential order here or anything, but the moment that stuck with me the most from this movie is it's after Cardinal Ademi, after he is confronted by Dean Lawrence around the scandal, and basically Dean Lawrence has to deliver the news that he's not going to be Pope. He's not getting the votes after what happened. I thought that whole scene was beautiful because it did not let the Cardinal off the hook for something that he did, even if it was 30 years prior, even if he feels like he's a changed man now, even if he feels like he was set up in that situation, and he may have been a great Pope. It didn't let him off the hook for what he did, but it showed so much grace and empathy that Dean Lawrence was stern with him, but still told him, you are a good man, and still stayed and prayed with him. And I thought in this movie that is ironically about all these men doing corrupt things to vie for power when the power is supposed to be the holiest person on earth. I thought it was amazing to get that one moment of, oh, there's still folks who are sticking true to what this position is supposed to be. We're not going to allow you to just skate past and become Pope because of what you did in the past, but we are going to give you forgiveness and empathy for you as a fellow human in that situation. So I think that scene was powerful for me, and it broke that is a scene that I saw both times, and both times I thought was an incredibly impactful moment.
And I love that moment when he asks Lawrence to pray with him. And that is set up because Lawrence has said, I think multiple times, about how he's struggling in prayer. And that's a part, like, that to him is his disqualification from being Pope, almost, is that he is struggling in prayer. And I love that moment because Lawrence agrees, obviously. And then he just comes and sits next to him. And we don't hear him pray. We don't hear him say anything. And we don't know if he ever did. He might have just sat there with him and just understanding that his presence is enough. And I loved that insight because it felt like such a vulnerable moment for Lawrence as well, because he's struggling with this thing. And then he's in this very vulnerable moment with this man who wanted to be Pope but can't be Pope. And so there's just so much vulnerability in there. And Lawrence doesn't run from it. He doesn't put on a show of piety. He just sits in it. And I just thought that was such a beautiful moment, like you were saying, of empathy and connection. And I don't know, like, I wouldn't have expected that from these grown men in this religious space that are vying for power. Like, you wouldn't expect empathy and compassion in that scenario. And then that's exactly what Lawrence meets this moment with.
No, you would not expect that at all. You would expect some of what we probably get later in the film. So I think it's also interesting for the film from a pacing perspective that twist, that moment is what kind of is the first big moment of reveal that happens. And it feels like such a fun misdirect because it kind of, like, my guard is a little bit off of like, oh, okay, maybe this is a different type of movie than I thought it was. Because I thought, you're ready for some like big betrayal, manipulation. And then we get that later on. So to start with something that is so deeply human and emotional and building this connective tissue, and then seeing the different ways that the other men react to being confronted with some of their corruption or their flaws and their sin, paints such a great contrast. So it's almost like Adeyemi was this beautiful portrayal of what a repentant heart that once just really truly wants this, but now has accepted and understood the consequences of its actions and taking it with such grace and elegance. And then we get to see how some others react. So kind of starting with this one is an interesting choice too for the film. The one other thing that I really loved about that moment is that it happens in, I think it's Adeyemi's room or his bedroom, I believe. And because we are so contained in this environment, these couple of rooms and hallways, that the choice of place for every conversation feels so significant because we're not outside, we're not going that many places, you know. So the world of this movie is so small, and to have such a vulnerable moment happen in his room feels fitting for kind of being in the kind of innermost space or sanctuary for him as well. And, you know, I'm thinking about the other moments and confrontations that happen where they're in hallways or darkly lit hallways, you know, and so this like kind of brightly lit inner sanctuary, vulnerable space for Adeyemi to be the place where they have this conversation kind of tonally felt really fitting, very right.
Well, and like the way that Lawrence comes in too, I think is so intentional too, because he tells him to wait outside and like the door is ajar, and then Lawrence like thinks about it for a hot second, and then he's like, no, we got to do this inside. And so then he makes his way in, which is the first sign that something's wrong. But then it goes through that whole conversation. So even that social awareness to understand what this moment needs. And then we see that Lawrence doesn't always handle all these situations really great, and his ego gets involved in all the things. So that's really fascinating to watch, that this one is so early and it starts with tenderness, and then it just kind of escalates as Lawrence sees himself in the running. Then things kind of fly off the handle some.
Yeah, I'm curious, well, since we've arrived at this topic, what your thoughts were about Lawrence as the film is progressing. Because in a lot of ways, we as a viewer don't really know him, right? And we are still getting to know what his intentions and motivations are. We see his actions, but where are they coming from? Does he have ambition? Does he not? He says he doesn't want it, but do we believe him? Was kind of an interesting thing that I was kind of like ping-ponging back and forth in my brain throughout this film. And it's interesting because the people around him seem to say to him and comment on his ambition, though he denies it. Is that because they're paranoid? You know, like, I think the unreliability of understanding his motivations was really fun as a way to follow this character throughout. And he, as you mentioned, Sarah, continues to do like bigger and bigger actions to get to the bottom of things, seemingly aligned to his opposition party. So I'm curious what y'all's relationship with Lawrence was as the movie is progressing and we're seeing him take action at every step of the way.
I thought of Lawrence and Ray Fiennes to be just incredible in that role, and I found Lawrence to be one of the most human and relatable characters in the movie. You're right, we're not quite sure what he's getting at, what's going on in his mind, what are his ambitions, but I feel the way the character is played is that like he also is not sure at all. He mentioned that months ago he tried to retire or to resign. He thought he knew what his calling was, and that was to leave this position. He was refused to resign, and then he's put in this place that it seems from the very beginning he's very reluctant to be in. He doesn't want to have to oversee these hundreds of different personalities vying for power, but he wants to do a good job because the man that passed entrusted him in it. In terms of his ambitions, I truly believe he started this with no ambitions. He's like, I want to get out of here as quickly as possible. Let me do my job and then ask this new pope to allow me to resign so I can go. But then as the folks who he felt were good candidates up against the opposition started to fall, I think there's an element of him that felt like, well, maybe I am the best person for the job. Maybe this is what's ordained for me. Maybe this is the path. Like he almost started to feel faith in that he could be the right person. By the end of it, there is interest, and this is where I think we'll really talk about how we feel he lands. But by the end of it, I'm not sure where he is. I think he's kind of resigned to the decision was made, and he's still struggling with if it's a good decision moving forward. But I do think he felt the most relatable, as in, I don't want this job. I'm forced to have this job. Maybe I want a promotion now. Okay, never mind. I don't want the promotion anymore. Like, he felt like he was going on that roller coaster.
Like you, Eric, I thought he was so relatable. I was rooting for the dude. I did not want him to become Pope, but I was like, I'm rooting for you, buddy. I just want you go be a shepherd, do your thing, like, get out of this conclave. Just keep your person intact. Be okay. 'Cause I love that at the beginning he gives his homily about that, like, certainty is like the greatest sin or whatever, and the interplay of faith and doubt and how those things connect. And I love that the film starts there. Like, he starts, instead of giving this cookie cutter homily that nobody's gonna care about, that isn't gonna rock the boat, he's like, nah, dude, let's be real. And he's so vulnerable in that moment, and sharing that to all of these cardinals about faith and doubt and all of these things. And so I was like, yeah, buddy, I'm rooting for you. Yes, let's go. And then I think he just gets wrapped up in it all. You know, I think this is one of those tales about the allure and the dangers of power and how it can corrupt, you know? So even if you do have pure intentions at the beginning, we don't know if that's actually what it was, but I'm going to choose to believe the best in him. But then as he went on this journey and people were whispering in his ear and saying, hey, you'd be a really good pope, and I think you can do it, and you're our only hope. And then he starts to get wrapped up in it. Then it leads you down a not great path and makes you make some not great decisions that kind of betrays your character. But I think that is what makes him so interesting. Like you said, Eric, so relatable, because it's so easy to do. It's so easy to get wrapped up in that stuff. So I had a great time just analyzing all of those things as we were going, and like, okay, is he going to like lean into his better self? Or is he going to get fully swept up in the corrupting presence of power, and what's going to happen? So I think that made it really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and I think that, to your point, Eric, Ralph Fiennes does such an incredible job conveying so much of that nuance, and like, he's almost like got his ping pong paddles for us at the ball in our brains, and he's just playing inside of our brains, you know, because there's so many subtle facial expressions, a wrinkle of his brow, a look that he has that you're like, I thought I knew what you were in this for, but that look makes me think a little differently. But then he's so earnest in the next moment that you're like, okay, no, I must have been seeing something. And that constant interplay and the nuance of it is really fun, because I think there's a simpler, dumbed down version of the story, which is like, he's the guy who doesn't want the job and he's the reluctant hero. And we love that kind of story, you know? We want to see the reluctant hero ultimately be this like rise to power, but he is so good in it. And I think you mentioned this, Sarah. I'm so glad that he didn't become the Pope at the end. I think that would have been such an oversimplification of the story and a little too predictable. So the twists that we get along the way, but also this battle we feel in him and we see in him of wanting to do right, but then also getting pulled in these directions, is really fun. So, and I think Ralph Fiennes just absolutely brings out so much of that subtlety, which I think really helps this movie capture so much of that nuance. One of my alternative one sentence summaries was going to be, Fiennes is so fine. But I went with the other one. But that was a candidate. Because he's so good in this. He's so good.
There's a couple of endings in this movie that would have been tragic. But I think one of the more tragic endings would have been if he became Pope. Because there probably would have been a moment there where he feels triumphant. He feels like he's up for the job. But in reality, I think he would have been doing it just out of a sense of duty / we don't want this other guy to be Pope, so I guess I'll step up. And the second he's alone again, with the weight of all of that, probably would have been very depressing for him as a person. So even if this ended with him being Pope, I'm like, man, he's not going to live a happy life in that role, because he clearly wants to get out.
And I think that there's a way that ending could have been interesting, especially with that weight and that tension. And I think that ending too would call back to the thing he says a couple of times about the Pope told him, "You're a manager, so manage." And I feel like that ending, like if he had become Pope, it would have been a similar situation of somebody else saying, "Hey, you're this, so do this," and him not really having a say or agency in that. So I think that there's a way that this movie could have ended that way and it been tragic instead of triumphant, but I still think that the way that it ended is better than that other alternative ending.
Now that we're talking about the ending, let's talk about the ending. We've arrived at I think one of the biggest twists, and I think the thing that I'm sure I've already read, the internet's just talking all about of some of the big reveals that happen with who gets chosen, and then kind of this denouement moment of more detail about who was chosen. And so I'm curious y'all's thoughts about the way that this ended. Did you see it coming? Was it satisfying for you? Were there open kind of questions that the movie left you with, maybe intentionally so, that you found yourself thinking about?
I can't say I saw it coming. I think when the character is introduced at the very beginning as this person that no one knows and sort of shows up, and then throughout he is almost whenever he's on the screen, it's kind of for lack of a better person, he almost looks like Jesus on the screen. He has almost this halo glow. Anytime they framed him, it was look at this perfect human. Honestly, I probably should have been able to see oh, this is where they're moving to. This outsider who has done a lot of work in the world and is coming in with no ambition and sticking to who he thinks would be the best Pope. So he's very morally grounded. So I was satisfied that he ended up being Pope. I did have questions / would this actually happen this way? Would they actually vote for a man that none of them knows? This is such a political, there's political factions. This man is totally out of the blue. Would they actually vote for him? But I was happy that they did. In terms of the final twist, that it's not, obviously, I don't know if anybody could have seen it coming. That's not a twist you can predict, but, I see the purpose of it. It's sort of the liberals kept talking about how they needed to push this religion into the future, and now they have a very present way to push the religion into the future, and how will they grapple with that? But there's also a part of me that feels like the movie just wanted one more thing to add. So I don't know if it works. It works completely. I don't know if it was necessary. The point was there, and that last twist was right before you leave, guess what? We're going to give you the literal gasp. No, people gasped in the theater when that reveal happened.
Yeah, I don't think anyone could have. No theories were forming on that front. Outside of the realm of plausibility, but best kind of twist endings. I agree with you. I think that maybe one. The thing is and this is reminding me of our conversation about Trap. Is there's these decisions that are made where you're this is not what I expected, but is that genius because the movie just kind of is taking you out of this very close proximity to this and kind of zooming you out to be this is all just so crazy, and all of the cardinals voting for this outsider, I was I don't really know what happened, but is that the point of the movie? Is the longing that we all have for unity, for someone that is here to just empathize with both sides and bring people together. Like, this is all we want, you know? This movie coming out in this season of time, too, I think is so fascinating. I've heard some folks using the phrase election escapism, which I just kind of love. I'm like, yes, this is the vision of society we need, where when a candidate comes through that is just like, hey, we need to be about the people. We need to be connected and rooted in them. And it doesn't matter what sides we come from. Like, that's the most important thing that we can anchor around. And people buying into that. Like, that is great. I felt all the warm fuzzies. And then that denouement ending kind of adds this feeling of all of the secrets and the political maneuvering. Like, it's not actually all going to go away. And so that kind of balance of something that was way more hopeful than I expected this movie to ever lean into. And then also, but everything's not all in the clear yet either, was kind of an interesting pairing. Left me feeling unsettled in maybe like a very intentional way by the end of the movie. You know, I don't get the gratifying feel-good ending, but also it is a vision of something a little bit more hopeful than I expected the movie to lean into, while still having that dose of it's not gonna be that easy at the end. Was interesting. Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts on this ending as well.
Obviously, when Benitez shows up, I was like, oh, he's going to be the next pope. Instantly, because it's like, duh, like you said, Eric, he's an outsider, nobody knows him, he's the underdog, he's the dark horse, like, yes, of course he's going to become the pope in this political thing. And so then I'm really focused on him in this movie, because I'm like, he's going to be the next pope, they're all taking each other out, he's going to rise, so what are we going to learn about him? And then once they start investigating him, and they started talking about Geneva, and they mentioned a like hospital or doctor in Geneva, my first thought was gender affirming care. I don't know why that was my first thought. What? I don't know where that came from.
Wow.
I thought that, and I was like, Sarah, come on, get that out of your head. What is wrong with you?
Wow.
So I'm not sure what clues I picked up on during this
I'm
movie.
voting for you for Pope. Like, you need to run our country, you need to run the church, you need to run everything that's genius.
No.
Yes. I'm writing your name in a little envelope now, doing a whole song and dance to slide it perfectly in that bow.
The skies of heaven will open.
Practice your Latin, you know. Yes. We'll get some matching robes. It'll be great. So, yeah, I don't know how that happened, but that was definitely a thought that I had while watching. So by the end, I was like, oh my gosh, how was that correct? That was my first thought.
So satisfying for you.
I don't know how that happened. But I did think the most unbelievable part of all of it was them all voting for him so quickly. And I was like, okay, I get it. So like the end almost felt a little abrupt to me, because we went through this long drawn out process of all of these votes, and they were all so beautifully done, wonderfully paced. Like it was thrilling to watch all of them. And then it's just like in an instant, boom, this other dude is now Pope. And I was like, really? Okay, that's fine. We needed to land the plane. It's been 2 hours. We need to wrap this up. But it did feel very quick to me. And then the movie was over. I was like, oh, okay. So we got a new pope and now we're done. So I think that did leave me, I think unsettled is a good way to phrase it. But I do think that was intentional, you know, all of these twists coming in a rapid succession. And I think that that's intentional in the pacing of the film, because it starts out so slow, and then over time, then it just like increases in speed exponentially, it feels like, and increases in drama exponentially as well. And so you're just riding this high of like, oh my gosh, all of these twists, and now we're done. And then you're just left to kind of process and think about it all. So I think it was intentionally done, and I was probably feeling like the aftershocks of all of those things, and then you just have to sit and think about this movie for a little while.
You know, something that stood out to me, because it did feel so abrupt. Like he gives that speech and then they do the vote and he wins. There's a couple of things that sort of clues us in that something is happening in the background. So first he had one vote and it wasn't his own. I don't know who the other person had voted. Somebody voted for him. And then the next one, I think he had maybe 4 votes, and then he had like 8 or 9 votes. And so he was slowly gaining votes, and he was steadfast that he kept voting for Lawrence every single time. So it wasn't like he was voting for himself. So that was one thing that shows like maybe in the background, he's having conversations and people are so impressed with him or they feel so drawn to him. But then the other thing, and this is actually, I can't really make what this means, so interested in y'all's thoughts. After he gave that speech, there is a scene, there's only like 1 or 2 scenes, but there's a shot of all the people in the courtyard and everyone's clicked up in like groups of 3 and 4s. And then he, like Jesus, is like sitting across, like by himself, like next to a wall, just like looking like he's praying. So I was wondering what that was symbolizing. Was like everyone discussing the speech they just heard in their cliques, why they wanted to show he's not campaigning. He's not going person to person trying to put his name. Is more organic than that.
That's a great point that you made around the progression of his support growing over the course of the film, which I was focused on kind of who the leading players are because I'm just following wherever the movie's taking me. So that's where we're focused on like the other kind of big flashy players. But you're so right. Now that I zoom out and you pointed it out, like he goes from one measly vote to kind of continuing to gain support. And so the arrival at kind of this tipping point, especially when other candidates are falling out of the race because of their corruption, they're being asked to step down, or they're kind of becoming too fiery in a direction that feels like it's not sitting right with the other voters. This is someone that kind of like can tip the edge at the end there. So you're right. I think there's probably more evidence there than perhaps I was focused on, which makes it fun from a twist perspective, but also intentional for the film to, when you think back about it, like, yeah, there were some things there that actually set that up well for us. Unless you're Sarah and then you just figure it out from the beginning. In which case, we're writing your names on all of our little papers.
Nope, I would not be a good pope. But I love what you said, Eric, about him separating himself after that moment. And I read it the same way that you described, that he is not campaigning. He's not looking for this. He's not here to try and become pope. He's just here because he's a cardinal and that's what you do. Like he's just like everybody else. And so that organic support that had been building has now kind of reached a fever pitch, and other people are campaigning for him, and other people are doing that influential work while he's just being himself and needs to take a moment. Honestly, introvert, yes, I would need a moment as well. So relatable content.
And imagine being dropped into like a work situation where everyone is pulling up everyone's dirty laundry and fighting and bickering with each other. Yeah, I would need to separate myself. I think in the speech he says, "This is my first time with y'all and probably my last."
Oh, it was so funny. He was done. He was calling everybody out. I think at one point in his speech he says, "We are all small, petty men." And I'm like, wow. Not holding back at all. But that was kind of this elevating of their perspective that I feel like everybody needed. They're all so focused on the cunning and the backstabbing and the maneuvering, and he kind of lifted their perspective beyond this small enclosed environment. And I think what you mentioned earlier, Eric, around him pointing to what's happening in the actual world outside of their walls, and his experience and connection serving people really shining through, because they're just in this like stone entrapment here, and it's easy to lose a lot of that perspective of what it's all for. And so his ability to lift their eyes up, I thought was really, really cool.
So something regarding this character that I listened to another person pointed out is, do you all think that the Pope that had just passed, did he orchestrate all this? And the little bits of evidence people have is, one, he quickly like affirms this guy as a cardinal, doesn't tell anybody, so no one has any time to look into his past. So he doesn't tell anybody. He tries to get him to have this gender affirming care. He denies it. But again, the Pope doesn't say anything, knowing that this vote is probably going to come up and people will dig dirt. But then two, what is his name? Cardinal Tremblay, the one who had the woman from Nigeria fly over. He kept saying that the current Pope, he was steadfast. Like, the current Pope told me to have her come. He was like, I don't know who this woman is. The current Pope, or the past Pope, excuse me, told her, or told me to have her come here. And then on top of that, he kept all the receipts of Cardinal Tremblay's like bad money, like money laundering basically, or affairs that knocked out a bunch of other cardinals. Like, was the past Pope playing chess from the dead to get, like, we say everyone here is corrupt. I think the past Pope may have orchestrated this perfectly for his guy to become the next Pope.
So we had a ghost haunting the conclave and bending everyone to his will.
He's strong. The power within is strong.
Though, like, hey, you got to do what you got to do to get your guy in power. You know, the Pope was doing his work. Yeah. No, I had a similar thought of, maybe not that he like planned the whole thing, but I definitely think that he set some things in motion of who he didn't want to be Pope. So I don't know necessarily that it was like Benitez was his guy and he was like, hey, let's get you in here. He might have been, I don't know. But I think he was definitely like, hey, Tremblay is not my guy, so let's make sure that he's out of the running. So I think he was definitely tipping the scales. I'm not sure to the degree that he was tipping them, though.
Imagine if he had Tremblay bring the woman from Nigeria over and then force Tremblay to resign. So there would be no, oh, Tremblay is the one that brought her over type sort of situation.
I had a thought at one point in the beginning of the film that the Pope was orchestrating to have Lawrence become the Pope because he's been appointed to this position, and then kind of in the entrustment of that and the demonstration of his well-handlement of it being a kind of natural gateway for him. Kind of like when at work you have someone like be your interim manager to fill in for a gap, and then they kind of just do such an amazing job. That's kind of an easy fast track to like, well, you're already managing the team anyway. Like, keep doing it. But that's an interesting theory, Eric, because he definitely leaves the evidence of those receipts that were confidential, like straight up in like the top shelf of the drawer of his desk. It's not even in an envelope, you know? And so I'm like, that seems like an interesting, unless it was like, he really just left it there and surprise death happened and didn't get a chance to go back to it. But it still seems like you'd want to put some of that stuff, if you're really trying to conceal it, not in the top shelf of your desk. Yeah. Perhaps.
It is fascinating to think of the past Pope knowing that his time was up and starting to try to figure out who his successors, sort of what you were saying, Sarah, who his successors definitely shouldn't be. So he's like, I know the exact people we shouldn't have in power, which sort of leads me to, why could they not find any dirt on Cardinal Tedesco? Because he seemed like
he
one of the worst humans.
A whole garden of dirt.
Yes. Why were they focused on taking each other out and not focused on taking him out?
Yeah. I kept waiting for his downfall. It doesn't actually come, but I was waiting for it too, because they're just knocking people out, you know, one at a time. So I'm like, well, he's the last one. It's like playing a video game. He's like the last big boss that you're going to take out before you win the level. And he doesn't. And maybe it's because he gives such a fiery, like, emotionally driven speech, and the contrast with Benitez's speech just like kind of spoke for itself. That people were like, oh, like that rhetoric around hate. We trust that people will naturally know and understand that we are not for that man. We are for this man who is trying to empathize. And like that was his downfall. It's just literally him. He is his own downfall. He is his own dirt.
He opened his mouth one too many times. I did think that character, as much as I hated him, I loved every time he opened his mouth, every time he did anything, because he was so flamboyant. And I mean, taking out the vape, which is still, that's just the funniest thing, is to think of the Pope ripping a vape. Like, he was objectively a fun character to watch, even though the things he was saying was obviously very oppositional to where they wanted the Catholic religion to go.
I love the cuts to him just randomly. You know, he just looks like he's scheming always. He's just looking like he's got a smirk on. He's got something up his sleeve every time they would cut over to him.
Yeah, he was his own dirt. Like, they didn't need to find anything about him because it was all on the surface. They all knew who he was, what his plans were. He was not hiding anything. So we didn't need to find any dirt because everybody knew. So that's kind of how I read it, is like, okay, we have to take out all of these other people, or we have to find the best person to fight this opposition because we already know that he's awful. So like, who is the best person to take him on? But man, it would have been some hot gossip, I'm sure. Whatever skeletons he has in his closet, that would have been some high drama.
That's in the next movie, Conclave 2. Benitez versus
we do not.
Just kidding. We don't
need
that movie.
There was and I cannot remember who was the individual that said it, but there's a moment towards the end of the movie where they're pretty much realizing this is when they figured out we need to coalesce around Tremblay because everybody else was falling. And I thought it was fascinating that, one, they were so quickly to say, well, we've had worse popes in the past. They're like, we've had popes who were Nazis. We've had popes who obviously let horrible things happen to children. He's not going to be that bad. Like, what's another mediocre pope? So one, I thought it was interesting how quickly they just coalesced around someone who they knew was sort of corrupt and mediocre. But then a guy said a line, and I wrote it down, where he says, we serve the ideal, we shouldn't be the ideal. And I thought that part felt, and again, very human, that there are individuals in this world, whether it's political or religious or a mix of both, if you're the Pope, where you see them and you put them on a pedestal and almost forget, like, this is a regular human who has regular human situations going on in their lives. So again, this just shows that this movie doesn't let people off the hook, but it empathizes with them as a human.
I loved that line as well. I thought that was so great because, and it's such an echo to some of the moments that we talked about earlier with Adeyemi and whatnot, of like, I think he sees his own limitations and has the humility to accept them, and we see it in Lawrence as well, like understanding the bounds of his humanity. And then the other character that I really loved and I thought was such a fascinating addition to add color and dimension to this movie is Bellini, and the way that I loved Bellini from the beginning. I was like, homeboy is unafraid to speak his mind. He doesn't care. He's principled. You know what I mean? Like, he is fearless, and he don't really care if people are supporting him or not. He's just like, let them know these are my views. And I'm like, yes, I love that. Just that raw, like, transparency and honesty is really refreshing. He's not trying to scheme at all. But we see he later goes against his own principles and is not immune to the temptations of bribery, money, power. And but then his story's not over either, because there's this moment of repentance that he has and confession with Lawrence, and kind of acknowledging, like, man, I really messed up in this, and you were right, and I'm sorry for judging you in this way. And so, like, we see this counterbalance, like you mentioned, Eric, of these men that know their own humanity and are kind of unafraid of it. And it's such a contrast to some of the other characters we see that are trying to be bigger than they are and can never reach that ideal. And so that maybe is one of the many theses of this film, is the courage to acknowledge our own limitations in humanity, and that being our source of power, ultimately, of influence that people can really relate to.
And that weakness, or that like frailty that we have, and those imperfections that we have, using those to draw us closer to each other, leaning into vulnerability and empathy rather than the whole like, oh, I'm imperfect, so I'm just going to keep doing wrong things. Like, I feel like that was kind of like the whole like Tremblay part, is like, yeah, he sucks. He's done all these bad things, but like we all kind of suck. So like, let's go. It's fine. But I do think that the movie is going like, hey, no, like, yeah, we're all imperfect. None of us are the ideal, but we can find moments where we can connect with each other in that. And we can share those moments of vulnerability and empathy and embrace that messy side of humanity rather than just needing to like appear perfect on the outside and do shady things. Basically, don't be like Tremblay. That's just a good rule of thumb. No Tremblay.
I don't think he ever learned his lesson. I don't think there is not a single moment where it felt like he wanted to apologize or anything.
Mm-hmm. He's like, deny.
Yes.
I loved the shot of him when Benitez, his win is revealed, and he just looks so salty. It was hilarious. This movie's just, by this point, this movie's fully leaned into being hilarious and funny. And it knows that you're also ready for it as well. So the cuts of him and Tedesco, I thought were just really great, really funny.
Yeah, somehow they ended up on the same side.
Just pissed.
They ended up being the same person.
Mm-hmm. Okay, other big things that we wanted to talk about, mention. There's probably a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, one thing that I wanted to talk about that is curious that it sort of is now at the end is the sheer lack of women in this. Well, their presence is always there. You see them serving food and kind of walking around and getting things together, which is a commentary in and of itself. Within organized religion, women are still, even women at the highest order, like Sister Agnes, is still relegated to domestic duties. But I wanted more. I know that wasn't the point of the movie, but her 1.5 scene was so powerful that I was just like, imagine if she was more integrated into this, even if she was out here scheming and getting dirt on some of these men. Like, I wanted more from that character.
I would love the other version of this movie that's just the same events, but from the perspective of all of the women and the nuns that are like literally collecting all of the details, all of the juice. They get it all. And I love that when Sister Agnes enters into the cafeteria or the room that they're in where they're eating, and she says, we were made to be invisible, but we have been given eyes and ears. And I was like, what a slay. And then she does her little bow at the end. Oh, it was cherry on top. Perfection.
The bow was perfect.
The bow was perfect. Oh. But you're so right. Like, they play such a key role. And I love that we get to see a moment where their observant eye plays a huge role in uncovering a lot of this.
That lack and that desire for more, I think, is so intentional. And it's such an intentional commentary that this film is making. Earlier on in the film, when all the men are talking and plotting and scheming, and Bellini talks about wanting women to have a greater role in the church, and one of the other cardinals says, let's not mention women. And so I think that line is really what frames that. And so I think that feeling of like, we wanted more for the women in this. We wanted them to be more involved because they are so present. We want them to have some agency and influence what's going on and have a say and have a voice and all of these things. I think that's so intentional of the film because it's set up with that line, and then we see all the nuns come in and them doing all of their things. I think that was absolutely intentional to get us thinking about women in the church and even women in larger society and what the roles are and all of that. So I thought that was really beautifully done. And then Isabella Rossellini is phenomenal. The queen absolutely slays that few lines that she has in the cafeteria. I was like, yes, you go, girl. Like, I was so pumped. I was ready to go. So she uses her time very, very well. But I thought that was just beautifully done to get us thinking about that larger theme in a movie that's so centered around men.
The other big shout out that I wanted to give with this film is a lot of the technical aspects really making this film so exciting, so fun, and I think adding to the overall thesis. So a lot of the cinematography choices around spending screen time showcasing the ceremonial aspects of every step. So we were joking about the voting earlier, but like the pomp and circumstance of a lot of what goes into this, I think, is clearly communicated through these moments for the movie to breathe, honestly, from the dialogue, but also we're seeing so much of this, them preparing the garments for a ceremony and all of that, I think, is so much a part of the thesis of the film around the construction that we have put into this thing that feels so big. Because it is big, but also we've made it to be very big, and it is created by and stewarded by men. But what is it? What is, if we had to boil it down, like, what is it really? If you strip away all of the excess. And then the score. I mean, the score is incredible. It's so well paced. It's not overused like some of those like big like pangs of the strings that it does. Not too overdone. It just comes at the right moment and gives you such a sense of like things are brewing in the shadows, but you don't know it yet. And I thought that adds to the overall vibe of this movie that I think also makes it this entertaining and probably contributing to a lot of its box office success. Is just, it's a fun time. And I thought that was really great for this film. Would have been different without it.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said there, from the very first scene, it, like, puts you in that, like, when he's walking in that tunnel and that music, you just puts you into, it almost feels like you're in a heist movie, honestly. You're like, your adrenaline is on 10. But then the other thing I wanted to point out is that sound design. You said at the very beginning, you felt like you were in that room. The amount of time, like, how loud we hear Dean Lawrence's breathing in this movie. I first saw it, I was just like, is this a mistake? Like, is he too close to a microphone? Because it's so loud. Like, this man needs to do some cardio. But it does put you in this heightened sense, like, oh, we're supposed to be quiet, but we can't because our hearts are racing and we're breathing really heavily. Yeah, the movie felt very immersive.
And I loved that you could notice like changes in his breathing throughout the film too. Like when he's first walking, obviously he's trying to walk fast and he needs to do cardio. So he's breathing a little bit more heavily, but then you see other times when he's at rest versus when he's in stress and like all of these different changes. And I loved that you could hear like the tinkling of his cross as he walked, you know, hitting against the buttons, and the way that when they were walking down the hallways, their shoes striking the ground would kind of echo a little bit. Like there was all these little things that feel like, oh, is that a mistake? Is that how that's supposed to be? And it's absolutely intentional to make you feel like you're there. Like those are the sounds that you would hear if you were in the room with these guys. And I loved that. It's such a little detail, but that intentionality really stood out to me. And it's one of my favorite things in the film, which is a weird thing to say about like sound design and sound mixing, but it makes such a big difference.
The way they built up the scene with the explosion, I mean, perfect sound design there, because it's so quiet, it's so tense. He's just voting for himself, and then the loudest boom literally makes you like jump, how they would have been in the room. So you're right, it's weird for sound design and sound mixing to be one of the most impressive things about this film, but it truly is. My last question is, you talked about the awards possibilities for this. Where do you all see it falling? Because it is rising quickly in rankings.
Our dude, Ray Fiennes, better get something, dude. I think he is doing some of his best work. I think Stanley Tucci as well is an amazing addition to kind of balance our such different personalities, and I think add a lot in the side conversations to this film. So I'd love to see some flowers there given to those folks. I think a lot of the set design and cinematography, I think I'm excited about. We'll see if the Academy aligns to what I'm excited about. But I'm curious to see the way that some of the topics that are covered in this film are able to be received by the Academy, which tends to be a little bit slower to embrace progressive ideas. But we'll see. I mean, they've been doing a lot of reform over the past couple of years. So a film like this, tackling a topic like this, we'll see if there's a willingness to embrace it or if they're going to go for some of the other options. But so far, a lot of the rising contenders for award season seem to be a lot more out there than the Academy is typically willing to go for. So like something like Mila Perez, this seems to be kind of garnering some interest and momentum. So I'm like, all right, well, let's ride this wave.
Yeah, we'll see if they go with Benitez or if they'll go with Tedesco. Which way are we going, the Academy? We'll see.
Pretty much all of what you said there, I can see it popping up. I mean, we mentioned the sound design and sound mixing. I think best sound can be in play, and best score can be in play. The composer already won for All Is Quiet on the Western Front. So this could be another one where he's just keeping these winds rolling. But I do think we can safely say that this is going to be one of the best picture top 10. Like this feels like something that folks are getting behind. And in a lighter year for best picture contenders, who knows where, I mean, a movie about wheeling and dealing and campaigning. We'll see what they can do to get this movie higher.
Agreed. I think also like coming off of the season of this year that we're in, there's potentially like extra amounts of interest and like willingness to just sit with this movie. I was thinking about like a lot of the strategic choices from like a marketing and release perspective around like the timing, because it is so reflective of the time that we're in, a lot of the discussions that are happening in society in general. So I'm like, that's just some genius choices, It's also right after so much of the chaos. So I'm like, man, people are just ready for a movie like this after what we've been through. Just a little fun, a little bit light, but also still meaty. Sink your teeth into it. There's some really great commentary, some really great theses about humanity. There's some hopefulness, but not too much. It's just what we need this time of year.
Yeah, it's a little freaky that they would have written this, 2 years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. If they wrote it 4 years ago, then it's cyclical. It makes sense. But some of the things that they said, literally word for word, I'm like, I've heard that over the last month now. So it is eerily timely.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of Conclave. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Movies and Us. And a big thank you to you, Eric, for joining and sharing all of your thoughts and opinions and perspectives on this movie. It was really great discussion. We always love having you here. Where can people find more of you, your work, your commentary about movies on the interwebs?
Thank you again for having me back. Always excited to talk to you all, and already thinking about whatever the next movie we'll discuss can be. But you all can find me primarily on Instagram at e_film reviews. I'm also on Threads as well, same username. And then I've just recently moved over to Blue Sky as well. So I'm giving that a try. There's a nice little small community burgering over there. And I'm on Blue Sky under Eric Jamal 91.
Nice. Yeah, go check him out. We'll include all of those in our show notes. His IG feed is beautiful, y'all, first of all, I forgot to say. And then when you click into it, there's just really great commentary and thoughts about especially the films that he's been watching. So we'll include all of that in the show notes. And yeah, we'll be scheming for the next movie we get to talk about together. All right, well, our name, Movies and Us, sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Conclave. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Movies and Us Pod, or email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. This episode was edited by Melvin Benson from Cinematic Doctrine. Check out his show for more great movie conversations. We'll be back next week to discuss the film The Piano Lesson. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see y'all again very soon.